Good evening and welcome to Connections, a Bible study of the New Hope Missionary Baptist Church, where we hope to connect the Bible you read to the life you lead. Well, welcome, and we hope and pray that everything is well with you and your family, and everything is okay at your house. We want to thank you for joining us for this brand new series. We got it kicked off on last week. And so if you didn't get it, it's online. It's at Facebook and at YouTube. We invite you to check it out as we are dealing with a very, very sensitive issue. And in our case, it is very apropos for us to be considering this issue at this time. We are going to be talking about navigating grief. That's what we're going to be talking about. How do you and I deal with grief? And this is part two of our study, and we invite you, as always, to join us on just look us up on those platforms, and you'll be able to follow us. Okay. So what we're going to be doing is going through some resources, trying to connect you with some of the great thinkers in these areas, and help you and family and friends to get the skills we need to cope with loss. Okay. Uh, I just want to take a moment to inform, notify the New Hope Church family that we have indeed suffered a great loss. And for those of you who may not know, I want to brace you so that you get some time to collect yourself. Uh, but Chairman of Deacons, Deacon Robert Cowell, earlier this morning, went on to be with the Lord. So we're praying for his wife, Delane. We're praying for his daughter, his grandson, his family, his sisters. We're praying for all of his family. And, he's been the deacon, our head deacon for quite a few years. And already he had left us with a void. But I really struggled tonight with coming on and teaching all subjects navigating grief. Thought about what Dean Cowell would say to me: Reverend, don't you stop the class because of me. And so I'm trying to honor what I think he would want us to do, is to go on and, do the best we can. Okay. So we solicit your prayers on behalf of the family and on behalf of the New Hope Missionary Baptist Church. Those of you who knew him knew that he was the kind of guy who was always there. Uh, just 2 weeks ago, he was in our worship service. He's been facing some challenges, but it never let him deter. It never slowed him down. He just kept pushing forward. So he's going to be greatly missed, but we got a great God. And so, without any further ado, as we say, we're going to move on in our study. Now, uh, we don't know any details yet. It's still raw, still fresh. So, as soon as we know something, we'll contact you either by uh, church on Sunday or by email or some other ways. We will try our best to make sure that all of you are up to date. Okay? So we're going to be talking about understanding grief. Okay? Um, Now, again, welcome. Here are some of the resources that we are looking at. Okay? Now, Faith Doesn't Erase Grief by Kate J. Meyer. That's an excellent resource. Grief, Living at Peace with Loss by June Hunt. It's a smaller book, kind of question answer format. Pretty good stuff in there. Reflections for the Grieving Soul by Mike Napa is an excellent resource. It's more devotional, okay? A lot of this course that I'm sharing with you today will be coming from Kirk Neely's book, Navigating Grief. All right, so those are some of the resources. Okay. Now, in addition, I have some other resources. I'll tell you a book. I'll have to show it to you because this book has become very helpful to me in sharing. Okay, it's Navigating Grief Workbook. This is probably of all the books I have, is probably the most practical. Okay, a lot of what we're going to be sharing will come from this source book. It has a lot of good information in it. Okay, so let's continue. All right. So the first question that we want to deal with, and we dealt with it in episode one, but we felt like we need to come back and ask the question, what is grief? Okay. There are two words that we hear a lot in our culture. One is grief, and the other is mourning. Okay. In this particular episode, we're going to deal specifically with grief. Okay. A lot of people try to use them interchangeably, think they're synonymous, but we'll be bringing out in the weeks to come some of the difference between mourning and grief. Okay, so our focus in this episode is to how give us a working definition of what is grief. Okay, so if you want to take a moment and respond, you can. Okay, the question is, what is grief? So if you want to respond, you can just put some your response in the comment field. All right. Okay. So uh, the question is, what is grief? Okay, Elizabeth Jackson, thank you for sharing that. The feeling of losing someone. Okay. All right. Anybody else want to give us your definition of grief? What is grief? Now, I want to apologize ahead of time because my internet connection at home has been shut down, and I'm trying to get it back up. I'm not going to be able to get it up for this episode, but so I'm using my internet via my phone. So I may have some buffering. I may be not synced as well as I would like to be, but please hang with me. Doing everything I can to make sure that we stay connected. Okay. Uh, so Ross says stages of sadness. Okay, I like that. Uh, Sharon says pain and sorrow because of a specific loss. Okay. All right. So let's go and see what is grief. Definition: what is grief? Grief is a very sad feeling that happens whenever you lose something, someone, or some place important to you. I want to be clear that grief is not just about losing a person. Okay, you can lose your job and grieve. You can lose your home and grieve. Okay, you can have many things that will impact you and make you feel sad, and not just having the loss of a person. It could be a place, it could be someone or something. The key is that it's something that is important to you. let me uh, clarify what I mean. Every day we turn on the news, social media, whatever, and we hear about death. We hear about people getting shot. We hear about people losing their lives in accidents. We hear about people dying on battlefields. We hear about hunger, all sorts of things. But we don't feel, we don't grieve every loss we hear about. Okay? We grieve the ones that are important to us. So the fact that you grieve means that that person, that place, or that thing was important to you. A lot of times we can hear about death and dying and we just keep going. But when it's personal, when it's important to us, we have some feelings that we go through when we experience those type of losses. Is that clear? Okay. Um, Grief is the natural, and I would underscore the word natural, response to significant loss. Okay? So just be clear, we don't grieve about everything. We grieve about those things that are significant and important to us. All right? Now, let me give you some things about this particular class. Okay? This class, I have to issue what is called a disclaimer. I want you to listen to this because before every episode, I have to issue this disclaimer. Okay? And the disclaimer is you, not me, are responsible for obtaining such medical or professional advice as appropriate. If you fear that your grief has or could trigger thoughts that pose a threat to yourself or others, we urge you to immediately seek professional advice. Okay? Reverend Dr. Alonzo Perry Sr. is not a licensed therapist or psychologist. This class is based on his practice as a pastor. He does not provide medical advice, professional diagnoses, opinions, treatment services to you or any other individual. Okay? I can't prescribe medication. I'm not going to tell you what protocol to take. Okay? I'm going to do this as a Judeo Christian pastor who has been pastoring almost 27 years, been in ministry for over 40 years, have been in the bedside of people who transitioned, who died, who walked families to the grave sites, to burials, to preach funerals, counseled number of people through that process. Okay, uh, that's my basis for sharing this. Now, I won't be honest with you. When I was doing the research for this class, I found out in our community, a lot of pastors are not taught touching these issues. Okay. I do not believe that you have to be an expert in everything to share knowledge with people. I believe I also have a mandate from Christ to share what I know to help people when I can. Okay. I'm going to give you a lot of resources. I'm going to point you to a lot of different places where you can get help. And what I don't know, I will try to find the best answer. Okay? All right. Now, each week we will look at issues surrounding grief. We will also look at a biblical character that helps shed light on the process of grieving. And our first episode, we looked at the life of King David. And when you see the number of losses and the turmoil and the upheaval that he had in his family, it is a wonder that he was able to serve as king at all. Okay, a lot of people just think about David as the hymn writer, as the psalter for the nation of Israel. But, his daughter was raped by her brother, his son. That son was subsequently killed by another one of David's sons. David had a illicit relationship with a married woman. She became pregnant, and the baby they had together died. David's own son, Absalom, tried to kill his father. He humiliated his dad in public by sleeping with members of his harem. And subsequently, while Absalom was trying to take over the kingdom, Absalom was killed. And David cried, Absalom, my son Absalom. Okay, so he'd been through grieving, he'd been through all, and oh, I forgot to mention, he had a fight with this big giant named Goliath, and he was hunted and pursued by King Saul, who became jealous of him, who on several occasions threw a javelin at him, who tried to have him murdered, and it was uh, um, King Saul's own son Jonathan that saved David's life on a couple occasions. And then, as Jonathan and David became best of friends, Jonathan died in battle with the Philistines. So David, we think of him as this sweet, gentle shepherd boy, but he knew a lot about pain and suffering. Okay? Okay. Now, here's a question. How old were you when you first became aware of death? How old were you when you first became aware of death? Okay, take a moment. If you want to answer, you can put your answer in the comment field. I don't want you to feel like you have to answer any of these questions, but if you want to, put your answer in the comment field, which is right below where I'm speaking. Okay? How old were you when you first became aware of death? I think, best of my recollection, and I think I told the story before. I had an aunt who, well, that's one of my mother's aunts, okay, who died and asked before she died for me to come and pray for her. Uh, I must have been 6 or 7 years old, but I was very precocious. They said even at that age that the hand of the Lord was on me, or whatever that means. Okay. But and she died. Okay. Like the first person that I really have strong memories of dying. And I felt so bad and conflicted because my family didn't take me to pray for her. I mean, you can't really drive at that age. And when I heard that, she wanted me to come and pray for her, I'm like, okay, I'll do it. But I never did get to do it. Even today, I think about would things be different if I had been able to get there. Okay. So Elizabeth Jackson said she was very young. Deacon Anderson said 6 years old. Reverend Tyler says 7. Uh, Sharon says 10 when her godfather died, but younger when fish, cats, and dogs died. Okay, when pets died. Okay. Okay, great. Thank y'all for sharing that. Okay. Um, and we're going to talk about this because, a lot of people have this feeling, and we're going to get to it, that children should not, be exposed to death. I've talked to families and had to advise, counsel. The question is, should children go to funerals? Well, depending on how you feel about it, but understanding this, that death is a part of life. We can't shield our children from everything. Okay. And what people don't see, and they're not just talking about children, we have grown-ups too who are in denial because they never went to see. They didn't go to the wake. They didn't go to the funeral. And so somewhere in their mind, when we talk about fantasy and reality, they are still believing that that person is here because somebody said they're not able, they can't handle. But death is a part of living. It's we call it transitioning. Okay, it's like we go through one door so we can get to another place. Okay, so here we go. Now this book I was sharing with you earlier by Kurt Neely, Navigating Grief. It's a little short book. What I like about it is that he tells the whole book is a series of stories. He's a pastor, who's a counselor, grief counselor. He's also talking about how his grandfather died, and he talks about all of these encounters that he's had in hospitals, in nursing homes, in different places where people transition. And so he brings out principles, but it's all surrounded around a big story. Okay? Okay. So yes, some other folk are putting up when they were Gloria says when she first came away at death at 10. Brenda says about 12. Okay, so people, some earlier, some later. But there does come a time when we are aware, as Sharon said, even either through the losing of a pet or somebody dear close to the family. Okay. Okay. So let's look at this. Now, Neely in his book has what he calls 6 stages of the grief process. Uh, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross has classically come up with 5 stages. A lot of different writers will have different stages. We're going to talk, I wanted to talk about what Neely has described as the stages of the grief process because a lot of us need to come to terms with this because grief is a process. Processes take time. You can't hurry the process. You can't circumvent the process. It's a journey. Okay. Grieving is a journey. Okay. And we're going to find some more about that journey in just a moment. So, the first thing that Neely talks about is the first stage is initial shock. I think that some of you rightly were shocked when I came on and announced the death or passing of the chairman of our deacons. Okay, shocked. Okay, shocked because for many of us we just saw him. Uh, it's like I can't believe it. You hear people say all the time, "I was just talking to her. She was just over the house. We were just together. We were just and so the idea that they are now not with us creates what we call shock. Okay, so a lot of times people don't realize that when you are in shock, okay, you need practical help. Okay, a lot of times people don't think about this, but when you hear that someone has died, and we keep saying passing or going on, but the reality is, the cold hard truth is that they've died. Okay, we are initially plunged into shock. Okay, our system uh, goes into fight or flight. Okay, and so a lot of times when people hear that, they're they're immediately shocked, and it's like, what am I going to do? I can't believe this. Wow. And we immediately try to make some sense of the shocking news that we've just heard. I didn't know they were sick. Wow, I just saw them. I just, we were just together. Wow. And that's a heavy blow to the system. Okay. So the initial reaction stage of grief is shock. Even when the person has a prolonged illness, when they pass or die, we still experience shock. The grieving process, and it's a process, doesn't have to begin with shock. Sometimes, and I'm going to give you these 6 stages, but I want to let you know everybody doesn't experience them in order, and everybody doesn't experience them to the same degree. Okay? So if you know somebody's in shock, you need to get them help. Okay? You need to say, are you okay? Is there anything I can do for you? Okay? When I initially addressed this news, I tried to slow down. I tried to say to people as much as I could, I'm going to share something that may be difficult. Okay. Some people just like to be bearers of bad news. But you got to realize that when you bear the bad news, that you also are sometimes putting people in shock. Okay. And they in shock, okay, they may pass out, they may faint, they may have a real violent reaction, and you got to be aware of that. Okay. So people who are in shock need practical help. Okay. Uh, now, let me see. I'm trying to get this thing to move. Okay. Stage number 2, yeah, is numbness. Okay. You become numb. Your system shuts down. A lot of people don't realize that this is a natural response to grief. You know, you see people who lose loved ones and people start complimenting them. She's so strong. I don't know how he got through that. Well, they're numb, they're in shock. The, the body has gone into flight, fight or flight mode. What the body is trying to do is to protect itself. So, what does it do? It insulates itself. So, you see people who've experienced shock, who are numb, and we think that they are strong because they don't cry, because they don't emote, but they're numb. It's as if they've been bludgeoned, hit over the head with a hammer. Okay? Now, we need to start recognizing the symptoms of grief and recognize that if the body is simply trying to protect itself, it's going to send adrenaline. It's going to send a lot of stuff to that person. They're going to stay up late. They're going to, they're going to walk around. They're going to be numb. So you got to go to them and say, hey, look, it's time to eat. You got to go to them and say, look, you need to take your medication. Because, first of all, they're in shock and now they're numb. Okay? This is a feeling that a lot of people have expressed that they have when they have loss. They just do things and they don't even know how they got done. It's like the survival part of the body and mind takes over. And if there's not somebody around who recognizes the symptoms and can say to that person, hey, you need to sleep. You need to slow down. Are you okay? Tell me how you're feeling right now on the scale of 1 to 10. Okay? This is real. And if you've ever experienced grief, you may have felt this, feeling like you were immobilized by the pain of a sudden death. You didn't know what to do. You didn't know where to go. That's why at New Hope, when we have members who experience loss, we try to counsel with them. I'll sit with our administrator, Charnette Ravenel, and she'll tell you we sit with families by way of Zoom or in person, and we'll try to walk them through the process because we know and immobilized by the sudden loss. And it could be sudden even if it was expected. Does that make sense? Okay. So, uh, so Neely talks about this in the book, and it gets to it in some rather creative ways because he talks about people who have felt loss and have felt numb. Okay. Um, now, a lot of times people will see people and say, "Boy, she's taking this really well. Wow, he has great composure. Wow, I mean, look at how strong they are." Not realizing that this is a coping mechanism to deal with grief. Okay, the body is becoming immobilized, and they going through motions, and we look at them and say, "Boy, they're strong," but they are now on a grief journey, and we've been patting them on the back, telling them, "Way to go." The tragedy is a lot of people who are on the grief journey who've been through shock and numbness, our plaudits, our praise doesn't even register. Does that make sense to you? Okay. Now, let me see if I can get this to move forward. There I go. Oh, okay. Now, stage three is a struggle between fantasy and reality. Okay. This is where you are somewhere and you swear to God that you heard your loved one. Okay. You seen them. I mean, you're walking down the street and you see them. You feel their presence. Okay. You're somewhere between fantasy and reality. And the problem is in the grief journey is sometimes we can't separate the one from the other. Neely talks about in the book there was a lady who had lost her son, and he would go see her, and she would always think that Neely was her son who had died. And he struggled with, should I tell her or should I not? Okay, that I'm not her son. Uh, because she would float in and out between fantasy and reality. So they will hear you will hear the voice, smells, words, phrases will remind you that that person is just like right there. Okay. So stage three is a struggle between fantasy and reality. Okay. Uh, and you may be asking yourself things like this: am I going crazy? You know, mom died, but I hear talking. Now, Neely talks about in his book Navigating Grief about a an encounter that a lady had whose husband had died. Okay, and he would get up every morning when he was living, and he would get up early, 5 o'clock, 4:35 o'clock in the morning. He would make coffee, and then he would go take a shower. Okay, the house would be filled with the aroma of coffee, and then he would take his shower. And she said one day she's laying in the bed, and it's like 5 o'clock in the morning, and she smells coffee. Not only she smell coffee, but she hears the shower, the water running in the bathroom. She jumps up because the only person she knows that does this was her late husband. She puts on her gown, she runs to the bathroom, opens the door, and in the shower is not her husband, but her son, who had called her the night before and said, Mom, I'm going to come over. I'm going to spend the night. I'm going to spend some time with you. The son had adopted the same habits of the father. So just like dad, the son would get up early and make coffee and then take a shower. So they would laugh about that for the years to come because at first she thought that she was literally losing her natural mind. Okay. But it's not uncommon when you experience grief to go between fantasy and reality. Okay. That's why you need people around you. You need people gonna keep you balanced, keep you, you know, grounded and say, hey, you know, okay? Is that making sense? Okay. Now, number four, the flood of grief. Now, I want to share this with you because this is something that church people aren't ready for. Okay. Um, at some point in your grief journey, you are going to be overcome with emotion like you never thought. Okay. A flood of grief almost always marks grief following the death of a loved one, particularly if it was a sudden death. It may not come till the funeral. It may not come till their birthday. It may not come till the anniversary. It may not come until something you are looking at reminded you of that person. And like Niagara Falls, the floodgate will open. A lot of people, when that happens, they try to take that emotion and cover it up and say, I'm not going to cry. Okay. But one thing about tears and crying is they're cathartic. They help us to deal with our grief. Okay. Now I know this sounds like a cliche, but sometimes you have to ask people, have you cried? And it's not that everybody's going to cry. Some people are not. We're not going to give them demerits because they didn't. But uh, a lot of times that is how our body and system is able to cope by letting go of some things. Okay? So it is inevitable that at some point you're going to experience what we call a flood of emotions. You're not going to get advance warning. Nobody going to come and knock on your door and say, hold on, it's time for your flood of emotions. You may be in a public place. You may be sitting in a pew. You may be on the bus. You may be anywhere. You may be in your living room. Something happens, somebody says something, and all of a sudden you can't control it. It's just going to erupt. Okay? Is this making sense to you? Okay? All right. Now, the flood of grief can happen at any time. It may happen during the wake. It may happen at the funeral home. It may happen at the church. It may happen when everybody is gone. It may happen the day you hear about the death, or it may happen years later. But there will be a flood of grief. Nothing wrong with you. You didn't lose your mind. You didn't go crazy. This grief is a natural response to death. Okay? All right. All right. Uh, stage 5. Of all the stages, this was for me most meaningful. Um, Sometimes when you're on your grief journey, memories stab like a knife to your heart. You may think that you got over this life, you got back on track, everything is going great, great, and it's like somebody took a knife and stuck it in you. It's like the pain doubles you over. You're like, what is that? It's the grief journey. Sometimes your memories will stab you like a knife in your heart. We don't know what triggers that. We don't know when that's going to happen. Just like the flood of grief. These can happen later. These can happen all me about any time. Okay. But these are ways that help us to cope and deal with the loss of someone who was significant to us. You know, out of nowhere, you just like, man, you start crying, you start weeping. It's like the pain is so raw. It's like it felt when you just heard about the loss. And you said, man, I thought I was over this. I don't know what's come over me. That's what happens. Okay. Stabbing memories. Now, I like the way Aneely put that because that's, I've had this experience. It's not that I'm sitting around thinking about folk I've loved who've gone on. Something happens, and it's like, wow, it's real, it's strong, it's forceful. And, you know, few, excuse me, few times I've been in public and I've had these stabbing memories. And all I could do to compose myself, struggle was to keep myself together, to get somewhere where I could give vent to those emotions. Okay? So Elizabeth Jackson makes a great point. Anything can be a trigger. All of a sudden, that song that y'all used to get down to comes on. You look at a picture, and there he is, there she is. Place that you visited, maybe a restaurant. Who knows? Could be even coming to New Hope. Whatever it is, it's like that memory is like a knife that stabs you in your heart. Now, I'm telling you, it'll happen. I can't tell you when. I'm telling you it ahead of time so that you don't go off thinking that something's wrong with you because you were supposed to be over this. Then we get to stage 6 that Neely talks about. Okay. Okay, let me make this point. One of the most serious mistakes grieving people make is to refuse to speak about their loss. Okay. I want to encourage you from all that I've been reading and all that I know down through the years. One of the best things you can do is encourage somebody to talk about their loss. If people don't talk about their loss, you that's a red flag. I don't want to talk about it. You do need to talk about it. You do need to share. You know, I, people wonder why, and I've been around a lot of people who lost loved ones. One of the things that happens, and I see it, So I'm always encouraged when I experience. When you talk to somebody, they tell you what happened. And in that telling what happened, it helps them to speak about their loved one in that loss. Okay? Sometimes you need to ask people so they can tell you. And you can't tell it too many times. Every time somebody comes around, you tell it. Some people think people should get tired of telling it. No, no. Because every time we talk about it, it helps us. Okay? So please be attentive to people who don't want to talk about it. Because grief is a natural response to loss. Okay? So we want to encourage them to talk about it. We want to encourage them to share with somebody. So when people say, I don't want to talk about it, I don't want to, I don't want to deal with it. No, you're gonna deal with it one way or the other. Okay, so we need to make sure that people talk about their losses. Okay, talk about how what that person meant to them. Talk about the memories that they had. Okay, because sometimes in our culture we think that when people don't talk about it, they put it someplace. There are some holes that you and I have in our heart that are never going to heal. There's some things that we are never going to get straight. Okay. And holding on and not talking about it and being quiet about it and saying, you know, I don't want to tell anybody. That's dangerous. Okay. The person like that, you need to make sure that you keep your eye on them, that they get some good counseling, that they get in a support group or someplace where they can be encouraged to talk about their feelings. Because you don't know what's going on. They could be talking about hurting themselves. They can be talking about, yeah, I want to go where they are. You don't know. Okay? All right. So, uh, stage 6 in Healy's is recovery. Okay? Uh, Let me tell you about what recovery means and doesn't mean. Okay? Recovery from grief does not mean that life goes on as if we never experienced the loss. Okay? Recovery doesn't mean that we finally forgot about the person, that we let them go, we put them in our rearview mirror. Doesn't mean any of that. Okay? Recovery just means that we find some way to cope with this thing that we call the new normal. The new normal. The new normal is I'm going to finish this journey without you. You're going to be close to me. You're going to be in my heart. But physically, I'm not going to see you. I'm not going to be able to hold your hand. I'm going to have a new normal. Uh, in our first episode, we talked about primary losses and secondary losses. You know, we got to recognize that when somebody loses someone that is significant, they don't just lose that person. They may lose an income. They may lose a friendship. They may lose a whole family network. They may lose, a partner. They would lose a whole lot of things than just that person. Okay, it's like ripples. It's like the stone that you throw across the water, and it creates a ripple effect. So it is when we lose somebody. It's not just them. It affects us and it affects everybody around us. Okay, does it make sense? Okay, see, some of you, God has blessed you to be living and walking in this new normal. Okay, you've been wondering, what am I going to do now? How am I going to deal with the holidays? How am I going to deal with birthdays and anniversaries and special times? You now entered the land of what we call the new normal. Okay, so how we doing? All right, now I'm gonna take a minute and I'm gonna pull up another resource that I told you about, and that is a book by Anna Darbone. She's has a PhD in psychology, and she's wrote Navigating Grief Workbook. Now, this is not a collaboration. They have not come together to write. They just have shared the same title. The books are radically different from each other. But I'm going to share with you what we call some of the classic stages of grief. Okay, so our whole goal in this episode is to kind of uh, firm up what grief is. So we looked at some stages that Neely talked about, 6 stages. Now we're going to look at what we call some of the more classic stages. Some of you, if you've ever had classes on death and dying or gerontology about aging process, you may have heard of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who, 30, 40 years ago, popularized these 5 stages of grief. Okay. Now, some people say 5, some say 6, some have a different nomenclature for them. But everybody agrees, all of the so-called experts, that grieving is a process where we go through stages. Everybody doesn't start at stage 1. Everybody doesn't start at this point and goes through. Okay, so we're gonna look at some of these stages. Okay, now the first stage classically is when people hear of death and we go into denial. We say things like, I can't believe that. Oh no, it's not true. No, 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 no. I just saw her. No, no, please tell me. No, tell me you're lying. Tell me you got it mixed up. I was just with him. We were supposed to be going to dinner tomorrow, XYZ. So we go into denial. Okay. Now, denial happens, but we don't want to have people stay permanently in a place of denial. At some point, we have to deal with the reality that a loss has occurred. Okay, so what do I mean? I mean that sometimes what happens is people will have people who've had a loss, and the person says, "I don't want to go to the funeral. I don't want to go to wake. I don't want to do anything." Okay, now I'm not saying, listen to me. I'm not saying that you need to pick that person up and force them in the car and take them. But we got to realize that sometimes people can get stuck in the place of denial. And if they don't face the cold, hard facts, they may tell you they never died. Okay? It didn't happen. Remember, we talked about that place between fantasy and reality? Okay? So, denial in a lot of journeys is like the first step. We're in shock, we're in denial. Okay? You may have, when you heard about the loss of loved one or somebody who was significant in your life, the first thing you wanted to know was what happened. No, 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 no. Tell me it's not true. I don't believe you. Okay, that's denial. Okay. Second stage, Kubler Ross has talked about, and a lot of people experience, is anger. So a lot of times the anger may be at the person who passed, who died. You're angry because they didn't say goodbye. Uh, there were things left unresolved. And in addition to anger at the person who dies, which for those who remain is kind of like a situation where you can't really get that rectified because they're gone, you know. But a lot of times, and I want you to hear this, a lot of times when a loved one dies, people are angry. and they're angry at God. Because isn't God the one we say who gives life and takes life? And we're mad at him because why did you have to take my mother? Why did you have to take my son? Why did you have to take my friend? So we're mad and we're angry, and our anger often is with God. Okay? But here, let me share this with you. This is a caveat. I want to share this with you. Though our anger is with God, a lot of times we act out our anger on other people. You meek and mild, you like a church mouse, you don't hurt nobody, don't do, but you lost somebody and now you're a terror. You're mad at everybody. You're throwing things, you're upset, you and you're taking it out on the people who are around you. Okay. A lot of times that anger is misplaced. Could be that we're angry with God. But we can't settle the score with him, so we settle the score with the people who are near us. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's a second stage. Okay. The third stage is bargaining. Okay. Now this happens a lot of times when people have a protracted illness. Okay. They've been in a hospital a long time, and we know that they are sick and they are near death, and or they've been in a very tragic accident. You know, and you got that news. Brace yourself. Something tragic has happened, and so what happened is we will a lot of times start bargaining and saying, God, if you do this, if you let them live, if you just let me see them one more time, whatever. God, I won't do this, or I will do that. I'll do the other. So we start bargaining with God. And you hear people, Lord, please, take me. Don't take her, take me, you know. And so we try to do what we can to save our loved ones. And so a lot of times, what Elizabeth Kubler-Ross says is that we try to make a deal with God, you know. And this is all a lot of times in an effort to anesthetize our pain. Okay. Uh, Depression. Now, depression can happen as a stage where you are grieving and your loss is so impactful, it's so intense till it consumes everything. Okay, you don't want to get up in the morning, you don't want to eat, you don't want to do anything. You just want to be, you just want to be able to handle and be close to your grief and your pain. And so people go through periods of depression. Now, sometimes people can go through depression, snap out of it in a couple of days. Sometimes it can be a couple of weeks. Sometimes it could last a year or more. Now, we tell people if you feel like you got a family member who is depressed, you need to get him or her some help. Because if they were able to get out of it by themselves, they probably would have. They're going to need somebody to help to intercede on their behalf. Okay. All right. And one of the things that happens is imagine you have a partner who's been a lifelong partner. You've been married 5, 10, 15, 20, 40, 50 years. And now all of a sudden that person is no longer here. What are we going to have? We're going to have depression. We're going to have loneliness. Because you've been walking one way for decades. Now that person is no longer here to walk with you. And it's now you like on a journey by yourself. And so you be asking, what am I going to do? I'm going to cope. Okay. So, so that's true. Okay. Uh, A lot of times when people are lonely, they feel like nobody can understand the depth of their loneliness. They feel like they're the only one on this ride, that this is just something they got to go through. Nobody else can understand. Okay. So now that's when you need a good friend. You need somebody who can come alongside you because this is a part of the grieving process. Okay. If we stay here too long, it can be it can be harmful. Okay. Okay. Now, number five, acceptance. Now, acceptance is the other side. Like when in the song Annie, the sun will come out tomorrow. Acceptance doesn't mean that I forgot about my loved one, that all of a sudden I don't think about him or her no more. But it means that I found a way to deal with what we have been calling new normal. Okay. I found a way to deal with the fact that my life has really changed. Okay. I'm not over it by a long shot. I'm just able to move from one place to the other. I'm not as immobilized as I was. I'm not as incapacitated as I was. I'm not as numb as I was. I'm not as full of shock as I was. I reached a place of acceptance. But remember those stabbing memories. They may come back and remind me that, hey, I'm not as far along this grief process as I thought I was. Okay? Does that make sense? Uh, yeah, I think you make a good point, Ken Carter. Uh, I think there's some studies out, and this question is, can this happen to a close-knit organization? Grief, yes. Let's think about this for a moment. Some of the issues in America right now, the divisiveness, the anger, and the vitriol, and all of that, is a lot of it is symptomatic of a grieving people. And you may say, well, what do we have to grieve? Any of y'all remember the pandemic? Any of you remember the near over 1 million people who died? That's a lot. And some people, even though that's been 3, 4, 5 years ago, some people have never even grieved over the losses in 2020, in 2021, and following. And all they got is these grief journeys. They're just piling up on top of each other. Okay. Yeah. So, yeah. Uh, yeah. 9/11. It's another good example. Thank you for that. Of, you know, groups of people who were in trauma, been traumatized. And how do we handle when a nation grieves? Okay. We have become, honestly, numb. I mean, you think about what Healy talks about in some of his stages. A lot of those stages are what we see happening right now in America, uh, you know, with our culture. People are in shock. You know, they have suspended reality. They're somewhere between fantasy and reality. We have redefined truth. All this stuff is emblematic of a people who are experiencing grief. Now, you imagine we experience it individually. Imagine what happens when you get 300 and something million people who are all experiencing grief, who are all teetering between being in shock, being numb, creating their own sense of reality and truth. And people are like, how can this stuff be happening? That's what happens when people are in grief. Okay. So we see it. Okay. Um, so, what are some of the other ways that grief shows up? We looked at about 10 or 11 ways about grief showing up. What are some other ways that grief shows up? Okay. You want to put some in the comment field? We'd be glad to have you share with us. What are some of the other ways that grief shows up? What are some of the things that you have been through? Well, you've been on your grief journey. Maybe some things we didn't talk about. Okay. What are some of the ways that grief has shown up in your journey? Okay. All right. Let me help you. Some people will feel disoriented. Some people will feel like uh, Sharon said, loss in your personality. Okay. Increased alcohol use. That's a classic, right? Uh, Wanting to be alone. Thank you for that. Seclusion. Yes, yes. Overeating. Thank you for that. These are all things, anxiety. Now, here's what we say. When someone loses somebody who's significant and you see them deviate from their normal path, that could be a problem. Sometimes the deviation is short, is brief, and they get back on course. Okay. Uh, Sharon, there you go. There you go. Weight loss or gain, hair loss, personal hygiene, those things that, because remember, the system is now going into flight or fight. The system, your body is now just trying to survive. So it's not caring about whether you eat. It's not caring about whether you take medication. Not caring whether you take a shower, whether you wear clean clothes. Somebody else has to come along and say, hey, 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 did you take your medication? Okay, because the body's just trying to survive this shock to its system. Okay, so yeah, so some people just volatile. You talk to them one minute, they calm, and the next minute they like hurling invectives at you. They're cursing you out, and you're like, "What did I do?" That volatility is a thing. Okay. Uh, we talk about yeah, that's a great one. Deacon Anderson, lost the motivation. I don't want to get up. I don't want to do anything. I don't want to go to work. I don't want to see anybody. I just want to be by myself. Just leave me alone. Okay. And here's another one, guilt. A lot of times people feel guilty. Okay. Uh, Maybe they didn't do what they thought they could have done. Maybe they felt like this loss was my fault and they can't let it go. So they feel guilty. Okay. Denise, good to see you. She said, other ways grief shows up: headaches, isolation, recklessness, drug abuse. Let me share this about recklessness. Sometimes when people are reckless, it can be, and we're not saying every time somebody reckless is it is, but sometimes it can be that that person feels so much grief that they're willing to, just throw caution to the wind and say, look, I'll just take chances with my life. I'll run a red light. I'll do this. Because the hope is that I will feel better with my loved one than I feel better without them, than I feel without them. Okay. So they take chances that they might not ordinarily do if they were not facing this new normal. Okay. Okay. And Deacon King, you're right. Being alone. Okay. Now, in addition to shame, and we talked about headaches, isolation, recklessness, and drug abuse, yeah, if we see people who all of a sudden start changing their routine, and start doing things to excess that they didn't do before, those are red flags. Okay, we got to get them help. Okay, here's another thing that people feel is shame. Okay, uh, there's sometimes when people lose loved ones, they will take it upon themselves to take the responsibility and say things like, "It's all my fault. If I didn't do this, if I hadn't said that, if if," as if we could change the past. Okay, so these are all things that people feel. Okay, Little Jackson said, or I wish I could have told them that I love them. Oh wow, that is a great one, right? That's that remorse. Okay, so these are other things, and then also I want to, before I leave this segment, is let you know that grief does not just affect us emotionally; it can also affect us physically. Okay, uh, because your whole body, uh, grief uses your whole body to express a range of emotions. Okay, we talked about losing your hair. We talked about overeating, putting on excessive weight, or losing a lot of weight. So your body gets as involved as your emotional and your spirit. Okay, so like all aspects of you get impacted. Okay, now let me see this. Okay, in the moments we have left, I'm just going to read to you this verse from Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 1 and 4. Let me make it big so you can see it at home. There's a time for everything and a season for every activity under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. Okay. Do did you know grief is different for each person each time they encounter it? I want to make that real clear. When you lost somebody who was important and impactful to you, when you lost something that was important and impactful, when you lost a place that was important and impactful, you don't have the same experience over and over and over. Each journey is unique to itself. So you can't judge your grieving experience by how you grieved before. Like this, you can't say, well, I grieved this way for daddy, and how come I didn't grieve the same way for mommy? Or I grieved this way for my child, but I didn't grieve this way for my sibling. Each grief journey is unique. We get fooled into thinking that every time we lose, we need to do X, Y, Z. Some losses will hit you in the gut. Some losses we're able to manage and get to the new normal. Some of them, we get in one of those places and we just linger, okay? Because each journey is a unique journey to itself. So, because you're listening to me, I believe that you are on a grief journey. Maybe you're just starting. Unfortunately, maybe the news we shared tonight has kicked off a grief journey in your life. Okay? No journey is the same. They all are unique. Okay? So before I go, I want to talk about a biblical character, and the biblical character we're going to talk about is Jeremiah. Jeremiah was known in the Bible as the weeping prophet. Let me give you why. Okay? Jeremiah chapter 13, verse 17 in NIV says, if you do not listen, I will weep in secret because of your pride. My eyes will weep bitterly, overflowing with tears, because the Lord's flock will be taken captive. Jeremiah prophesied during a time before and during captivity. God told Jeremiah, if you read his story, he said, Jeremiah, don't get married and don't have no kids. Okay? Because the nation is about to go into captivity. I need your voice to be strong and to be a clarion voice and tell my people that I'm sending them into captivity because of their wrong and their sin. Jeremiah wept because he knew what was going to happen to the people. In fact, Jeremiah writes a whole book, and the book that he wrote is called the Book of Lamentation. It's a book of laments. It's a book of mournful prayers and cries about what's happening to the people of Israel. Kings and nobles made attempts on Jeremiah's life simply because he spoke God's word. I preach a sermon often about Ebed Melech, uh, who is a guy who was an African who had to get some other helpers to get Jeremiah out of the pit. And they got him out the pit because they had other prophets who were willing to prophesy lies. But when the king went to Jeremiah, Jeremiah said, I'm going to tell you the truth. You might as well just go wave the white flag because Babylon is coming and they are going to put us into captivity. Jeremiah was the one that told him to go into captivity, build houses, pray for the city, because if Babylon prospers, you'll prosper. What a word. Okay. So he was thrown in prison and he was accused of treason. Okay. So he lost his position. They wasn't respected as a prophet. They left him to die, all because he preached the word of God. Okay. Jeremiah gave voice through his lamentations about the pain of desolation the people faced after Babylon conquered them. So when you read the book of Lamentations, it's about Jeremiah weeping and giving voice to what the people were going to experience, their pain in losing their homes, their pain as being forcibly removed from their homeland, their pain of having their temple overrun and the things they treasured taken from them. And that's the whole book of Lamentations. Okay? So, Lamentations chapter 1, verse 1 and 2. From the NIV, how deserted lies the city, once so full of people. How like a widow is she who once was great among the nations, she who was queen among the provinces. Bitterly she weeps at night. Tears are on her cheeks. Among all her lovers, there is no one to comfort her. All her friends have betrayed her. They have become her enemy. So Jeremiah is a man who knows grief, who knows what it's like to be isolated, knows what it's like to be left for dead, and has watched a nation go into captivity, and the whole nation grieve. Okay? See, Lord, this is Lamentation chapter 1, verse 20. How distressed I am, I'm in torment within, and in my heart I'm disturbed, for I have been most rebellious. Outside the sword bereaves. Okay? Now, understanding grief. Okay, let me do this for you. Western culture, I'm sorry they got it cut off, but Western culture tends to be grief averse, Averse, meaning the Western culture, for some reason, our culture does not entertain grief. We want to get as far away from grief. We don't want to hear about death. We don't hear about dying. We don't hear about no process. We just want to talk about they passed, they went home, but we don't want to call it death. This culture, okay? See. Okay, so let's put a pin in it. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do this. Let me go back here. Uh, just get to hear and do that. Okay. So enough time. I have to put a pin in there in episode. Okay. Uh, now the screen. There are times when some professional. Let me do this. Okay. Yeah, I'm having a machine that's going slow. So let me just put a pin in it right there and ask the Danny prayer request. Of course, we're going to be praying for the Cowell family, for his family, that God would be with them. We pray for the church where he has served for so many years as chairman. Pray for each of us that God would give us strength to go through this journey of grieving. So if you have a prayer request, put it in the comment field and we will be glad to entertain your prayer request. Okay, so I want to thank you again for being with us. Thank you for coming aboard. Thank you for inviting family and friends. Now, we're going to go deeper because all we did in the first two episodes would define what grief is. Okay, we're going to go in, we're going to get some tools on how to deal with it, how to recognize it. So the next time somebody going through it, a family member, loved one, we can say, hey, maybe this will help. Maybe this is something that we need to look at. Okay. Grief is real. It's real. Okay. It's not something to be telling people, oh, just get over it. Oh man, you just need to move on. No, we'll start off next episode talking about that attitude that says, you know, just get up and get on about your life. Okay. So hopefully this has been helpful. We see Sharon, Glenn, brother Glenn, Marsha Jackson's lost, the Cowell family, and others who are in mourning. So anybody else have a prayer request? And we're going to go to God in prayer. I'm praying especially for you. Lord, we want to say thank you for this time that we had to share together. We thank you for this study on navigating grief. And Lord, you know our hearts. The stages that we talked about, many of us are already in some of those stages of shock, of denial, numbness, or bargaining. But God, wherever we find ourselves in the process, we are heartened to know that you promised that you would never leave us or forsake us. So we thank you. And so we ask, Lord, for everybody who's lost a loved one. And some people, one day is harder than the other. We pray for your grace and your mercy, that you will continue to be with us. Continue to strengthen and keep each and every one of us. I pray, Lord, for that person whose grief is so real, so recent, and so raw. I pray for that person who is having difficulty sleeping. Whatever the issues and whichever way they manifest themselves, we know that you're great. God, we just want to say thank you for giving us the ability to love at such a deep level till it really can sometimes hurt. And you remind us of how much you loved us, that you gave your own son. That we might have life. So I'm praying that you would be with each and every one of us, keep us, and Our world, you know the condition. A nation which still grieves and won't admit it. But you be with us is our prayer. We ask all of this in the strong name of Jesus, we pray. Amen. Therefore, my beloved brothers and sisters, be steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, for as much as you know your labor